Hello everyone and welcome to another video. I thought we would do something a little bit different and we would do a mid-year check-in. I know, I'm a little bit late in the year for a mid-year check-in, but July was a busy month. And I thought we would look at what have been my favourite makes of the first half of 2025 so far. So I have gone through my little knitting journal and looked at all of the projects that I finished in 2025 between January and June, and I've picked out my 6 favourites. These are the projects that I either enjoyed the process of making them the most or the projects that I am most happy with the finished item for, and I thought we would sit down and talk through them. I was hoping that I might be able to pick out a project from each that I'd finished each month, but we actually ended up with 2 projects from January and no projects from February. But I will go through them in chronological order with the ones that were finished at the beginning of the year first, moving through to June. So starting off with the Snowdrift mittens, which I finished on January the 12th. These are a pattern by Wool and Pine and they are just gorgeous cabled mittens. I will pop the other one on as well, although I do have a chunky watch on, which doesn't make it quite as easy. But there we go. I will pop the other one on as well. These were so much fun to knit. As I said, the pattern is by Wool and Pine. They have these gorgeous, gorgeous cables on the back of the hand. Obviously just on the back of the hand because you wouldn't want cables on the front of the hand. But it was really intricate and a really, really fun design to knit. The yarn I used is by Rainbow Heirloom. It is a DK weight yarn because this is a DK pattern. I can't remember the colourway. I think it was something like Princess Rockstar, but I'm not 100% sure if I've got that right, but it is absolutely gorgeous. I decided to think about like my positives and negatives, I guess, of each of these patterns. And the positives for these was these are super cozy. They are going to be so lovely in the winter. They are absolutely the coziest thing on my hands ever. They fit really, really nicely. I really enjoyed knitting the cables. It's not something I do very often, but when I do cables, I do really, really enjoy them. There's just something about the magic of the pattern that comes out of just twisting around these stitches that I love. I absolutely love. The only negative I would say about this pattern is that it does jump around a bit. It is one of those patterns where you're like, right, follow this chart over here, but also you need to remember to do this, and also you need to remember to do this. I'm going to take these off. I feel daft waving my hands around in mittens. Also remember to do this and this at the same time. So I felt like I had to jump backwards and forwards between the pattern quite a lot, which I did find a little bit challenging. But once I got used to it, it was absolutely fine. So that is my first favourite project of the year so far. The next project I have chosen was finished on the 29th of January, and that is my Alaska hat. Now this was my first kind of proper finished colourwork project. I did do a video on it, so if you wanted to check that out, there is a video on my channel called Conquering Colourwork, which is the process of me knitting this hat. The pattern is by Camille Descoteaux. And the yarn I used, the dark green was a Mr. B's yarn, who are now Bird Street UK, but it's been in my stash for a fair while. And the lighter colour on top is a Spectrum Fibres in the Oasis colourway, which has got like little neon speckles in there. I love how these colours worked together. It was really, really fun combining them. In terms of positives, as I said, it was my first full finished colourwork project, and I found the pattern really easy to follow. The chart was really clear. Considering this was not a straightforward, you repeat the same thing all the way up, like every row of the chart was completely different, I found it really, really easy to follow. The only negative I would say is that I'm not the biggest fan of the decreases on the top of the hat. I think they create a bit of a lumpy top to the hat, and I've definitely seen hat patterns that do much neater decreases on the top. That is the second favourite pattern so far. The next pattern I finished was finished on the 9th of March, and this is of course a gnome. I will admit there are more than one gnomes in this, but this is Nicole. Nicole is a pattern by Imagined Landscapes, as all of the gnomes that I talk about tend to be. This pattern specifically comes from the Gnomes of Grimblewood book, and the yarn I used for this was one of my own Giddy Yarns kits. This is the Spice Gnome kit. I absolutely love Nicole's beard. I enjoyed so much about knitting this particular gnome. The hat, I love doing the cables for the hat. As I said, I really enjoy cables, but I don't do them that often. So I really enjoyed the cabled texture on the hat. I also really enjoyed Nicole's beard. The way you do this is really fun and the result is really, really effective as well. So definitely one of my favourite gnomes that I have knit this year. I don't actually have any negatives to add for this one. I couldn't think of anything that I didn't enjoy about knitting this gnome at all. So only positives for Nicole. The next project is also a gnome. This one was finished on the 27th of April and this is Professor Fungi. Now Professor Fungi again is a pattern from Imagined Landscapes and he was the mystery gnome in April. So you got the pattern in pieces and you didn't know what the finished gnome was going to look like. However, I was one of the official dyers for the mystery knit along, so I did have a sneak peek at what Professor Fungi was going to look like, and I used one of my own kits that was specifically designed for Professor Fungi. So this is the Amethyst Gnome kit and I love how he came out. He was so much fun. My positives for this pattern in particular was that it was a really fun construction. It was quite a different construction to a lot of the other gnomes that Sarah Shearer has released. You knit it from the bottom up. The hat is not a separate piece for a change, which was really, really fun. So it was a very different construction, which was really enjoyable. My only little negative, which is not really a negative about it, but my only little thing to say about the pattern is that this is possibly not the best one if you're going to be using it as a toy for a child. I'm not, so it doesn't bother me in the slightest. It's only ever going to be displayed at the studio or at shows, but you do put a cardboard circle into the hat to create this shaping, and you also put one into the base to help him stay a bit more steady because he is so top heavy. And I feel like that could lose its shape quite easily if you were going to give this to a child to use as a toy. But overall, he is a super fun gnome. I love the shape of his hat. I love his squiggly beard. He was just a pleasure to knit. Then in May, on the 21st of May to be precise, I finished a garment. This was the first garment that I finished this year. For some reason I had it in my head that I had finished my Halloween jumper this year, but apparently I didn't. Apparently I finished that last year. So the first garment that I have finished this year is my Lento. This is a pattern by Jonna Helen, which was also in Lane magazine at one point. It's absolutely beautiful. I thoroughly enjoyed the process of knitting this pattern. It uses 4-ply and fluff held together, so I used my own yarn and I did a skein of Don't Leave the Path, which is the 4-ply, held with a skein of Surrey alpaca fluff in the fern colourway, and I absolutely love the texture that it created. I love the way that the colours blended together. See if I can get you a bit better close up. I love the way that the colours blended together, and I just, yeah, this is such a snuggly, comfy, cosy garment. I have already worn it a lot of times. I have still got one end that I have yet to weave in, which I really do need to do. It works really nicely under dungarees. It works really nicely over dresses. I did make it slightly longer, so although it still works under dungarees, it's not as cropped as some of the other ones I've done this year. So it works really well like over a skirt or something like that as well. I don't wear a lot of jeans particularly, but it would work well over a pair of jeans too. My positives about this were the construction is a massive, massive positive. Certainly for me. I mean, it will depend on what your preferences are in terms of construction and things like that. But the raglan increases were all knit front and backs, which is my favourite type of increase. I'm not a big fan of a make one right, make one left, because I always get them muddled up. I've heard so many different ways of trying to remember which is which, but I still have to look it up every single time. I always get them muddled up. So to be confronted with a knit front and back, I was like, oh my goodness, that's amazing. You do some short row shaping on the back of the neck, and that was all done using German short rows, which, as you'll know if you are a regular viewer, are my go-to when it comes to heel construction. So I didn't even have to look up how to do the short rows, which with a lot of other garments I often have to do. I have to go and remind myself of how to do a wrap and turn, or remind myself of other different types of short row construction. Whereas with this one, I just knew what I was doing straight away. So they were major perks that I found when I was knitting this garment. The only negative I would say is that because of the weight of yarn that you're using and the gauge of the pattern, I think I used something like 6.5mm needles, and I couldn't get fixed circulars in a 6.5mm needles that were a 30cm length, which is what I tend to use for sleeves as my preference. Now, this is something I could probably completely overcome. If I did go and pick up some interchangeable needles, I could probably make that work. But as someone who predominantly works with fixed circulars, I couldn't get a fixed circular in the needle size and circumference that I wanted to be able to knit the sleeves. So I did have to magic loop the sleeves, which did give me a little bit of a stumbling block in terms of wanting to pick this up while I was working on the sleeves. But overall, that's not a big issue, and it's certainly not a problem with the pattern. That's very much a me problem. I absolutely loved the process of knitting it, and it has created such a lovely jumper that I can tell is going to be constantly worn. I am already tempted to make another one because I just know that I am going to live in this during the winter. And then the final pattern we're going to talk about is a pair of socks. These are the Flourish socks, and I finished these on the 5th of June. These were the first pattern in the Handmade Sock Society by Helen Stewart. I have only got one on a sock blocker because I want to put the other one on my hand so that you can actually see the lace pattern on the front of the sock more easily. Sock blockers are great until you have a lace pattern on the front of the sock, and then it really doesn't show them off very well. But this was an absolutely gorgeous lace pattern. I really loved, one of my big perks for this pattern was that it's very much a pattern where the design is down the front of the leg and you are just knitting plain on the back of the leg, which is one of my favourite types of sock pattern. I really enjoy that style of design. It just works well with how I like to knit my socks. I don't have a negative for this pattern at all. I really enjoyed it. The yarn I used was from Craft House Magic, and it was I believe, the Nobody Put Baby in the Corner colourway, which is a gorgeous combination of pinks and peaches and greys, which I think is such a lovely mix of colours, and it worked perfectly, absolutely perfectly with this pattern to show off the lace to the best of the ability and not overpower it in any way. It is also a pattern that has hopefully reignited my love of sock knitting, which has been lacking for the last few years. I have delved straight into the Handmade Sock Society this year and attempting to knit all of the patterns, and this one really did kind of reignite that love of sock knitting, which is very exciting because I did love sock knitting and I used to knit a lot of socks, and I have a lot of sock yarn ready to knit socks, so I could do with my sock knitting mojo returning for definite. So that is all of my favourite patterns of the year so far. I hope you enjoyed that little review of my favourite patterns. Let me know in the comments if you have any favourite patterns that you've knit this year, any favourite projects that you have finished so far this year. What is your favourite project that you're currently working on? And if you have got to this point in the video, then why not leave me some kind of mushroom emoji in the comments for Professor Fungi, who hopefully will be getting some friends very soon. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you again in another video soon. Bye!